Alrighty, guys. It is 3:30. Time to wrap it up for today. It is Tuesday, May 19th. And all right, so we are right back to the mean again. Just kind of flopping in a range. To the downside, it's not seeing any directional move in a big way. This morning we said range bound trading. We were favoring the short side, and I think that's pretty much worked out. However, and then who knew they're going to have this massive short squeeze going on in halfway through the day? That was pretty crazy. And then now they've been slowly working themselves back here to the mean. And that's kind of where they are. That's why they end up closing both in the ES and NASDAQ. So I saw you had a couple of nice trades going there, Mihail. You got short here at the top. I mean, I wish I had that patience to wait for it. I blew my ammunition early on today. I got myself caught in the first little chunky area right here when it was super volatile. Got caught a couple of times, and that's just ended up with it's like I'm stopping this right now. So pretty volatile stuff going on today. Pretty a lot of range, especially on the Nasdaq, and a lot of volatility with it. So news we had this morning is the only thing I didn't see anything come out on the housing starts, but the pending home sales was a little bit weaker than expected. Tomorrow we get mortgage apps. We get 10 o'clock. We get Atlanta Fed business inflation expectations, 20-year auction, and then Fed minutes at 2. Nothing I think is really going to, maybe the bond auction on the bond side, but I don't think any of that news is going to really drive the market. So we're stuck in a spot where we are kind of twisting in the wind, waiting for the Nvidia earnings tomorrow, waiting for anything and the resolution to that Iranian situation. And then we'll see what happens with that. But right now, I would just stay range bound. I would favor the short side. On the ES, I think we have a little bit different range to get started with. I'm going to adjust this edge a little bit higher. So I'd look to buy against support down here at the 75s, against the 60s, and then against the 50s here for rotations up, all with a little bit of caution. So I'm favoring the short side. So I'm going to be looking at buying those with a bit of caution. Today, as you notice, buying them was fraught with freaking misery. So that was difficult. Getting short against resistance, definitely a spot. I'm going to move this edge up here to 7400s, up here against the 7415s, and then of course this upper area around the 7440s for rotations down. Now, if they start taking out the highs here at the 7450s, 55s, yeah, we may have something going here. But I'm thinking that we're going to have probably more range bound stuff, maybe weakness, if anything, going into the earnings. And then we'll see how Nvidia gets received and how the Thursday is going to be. That's going to be interesting. And you can also get a curveball thrown in there. Is this kinetic action? That would be a big curveball thrown into that mix right in the middle of it. So that's where we are. And so ES, just fade the edges fairly equally. Watch these upper areas, 7440, 7450, 55s. The lower areas here at the 7350s, 7335s, and the 20s, 25s here. These three areas are supported. They come out. We are on our way lower. But I mean, we had these two areas. It's a pretty good area right here at the 75 and the 65s. They took it out. The pro below it could not hold it. So that's just an interesting observation. So we will adjust the lower edge here a little bit, but include that this new area, the 50-55s here as an edge. So that's how we get started on the ES. On the NASDAQ, as I said, so I one trade on the ES. That was a shakeout early on. That was actually a decent setup. That was over here early on. Here we had that nice 3 bars. They could not take it lower. I was expecting a little bit of moves, but it turned out to be they just ran me over. Didn't have a big stop, pretty tight, so it was not big of a deal. The worst dynamic happened on the Nasdaq. That got myself caught in a shitty trade, and I realized my stop is way too tight at 80 ticks, so I made the trades that's a little bit bigger. And the first trade that's got low ticked on. I had a couple of shakeouts and a couple of losers. And this last trade here, I got short, repaired it, and I had to run it a little bit higher. And then right after that, they run it all the way down again, and then right back up again. So I mean, that's just frustrating. So when you get into a spot like that, it's just you have to kind of stop trading it because you're starting to shoot from the hip, and it's just not going to work well. So sometimes you just have to take your losses and leave it. So I'm down 260 right now on the Nasdaq on those 6 round turns. That's a shitty result, but when it's volatile like this, that's what happens. You're wrong twice and you end up in a pretty big loss. But either that or you don't trade it at all with that stop size. I adjust the stop size accordingly. But anyway, so that's where we are. To get started on the Nasdaq, I would look to excuse me. Picking up this freaking cold. It's just amazing how that wreaks havoc on you. Wreaks havoc on you. So looking for short setups against the 29,000s. Probably one here at the 29,060s, at the 130s, at the 180s rotations down. And I would shift my bias a little bit more aggressively above the 180s if they start taking out 29 180s on the upside. And on the way down, they did probe way below the low here at the 740s. They were down all the way here at the 670s. So now we have two pretty obvious edges here we had to contend with. But both of them comes out, bets are off. We're heading lower at that point. And then we're going to be down here, the lower edge to really pay attention to. And that would change the dynamic, the capital flow, I think. If that gets taken out. That's 530 down here. So that 530 area, these two support areas at the lower end of this range. If both of them comes out, I think we may see a change in capital flow. That it just depends on what happens with the Middle East situation and of course the Nvidia earnings. So Nvidia earnings is going to be a big deal. It doesn't happen until after they close tomorrow. So I'm thinking range bound trading still going into tomorrow. I would still favor the short side, same as today. Looking at the bonds, I missed one trade in the morning on the bonds. I was just because I wasn't in front of the computer. I was a nice setup, perfect setup like that. When you see 4 bars like that, I mean, you take that trade and no matter what. And then if it doesn't work, then yeah, so too bad. But those setups are usually pretty good. I was looking for a short setup up here against this earlier resistance area, but I could not, you can see how the volume dies off and it's been trickling higher. So I didn't want to be, it didn't set up the way it's just back and forth. And yeah, it would have, it may have worked for a few ticks, but it's not the kind of setup I'm looking for. So I didn't do anything on this short side over here. But they are range bound and they're down to 109.20s now. So bonds, they're heading lower, pricing down, yields are coming up. That's not a great sign for the stock. That's going to start having an impact. So high oil prices, high interest rates, going to be leaning on the stocks. So as you know, the chances are we'll see more weakness unless that starts resolving itself. I did that as well before I got there. I took that trade on the cryptos. I got out on that silver trade. That was over here in the middle. I got short here at the upper end of the range. I got out around about the midpoint on that channel. They took it a little bit lower since then. So I mean, maybe I left something on the table there, but they're so volatile. So you sit there for a while, and then suddenly they move, and then they stop, and they sit there, and then. But I got $19 out of that trade. Small trade, but nonetheless. So that's the only silver trade I took so far today. Back to the ES and the Nasdaq. And we are right stuck here in the mean. And as I said, it doesn't look like we're getting a lot of strength now. If anything, it looks like we're getting weakness in this last half hour. So we'll see where they end up closing. But as I said, I'm going to start range bound. I'm going to favor the short side into the overnight on both ES and Nasdaq. So not a great trading day, at least for myself. If you were a little bit patient and waited for that to run up here at the highs, they set up a couple of different times. After that second rotation, that third one here would have probably been a decent entry. Reverse retest of the tab, also a decent entry. But if you're geared on the long side here, you'll also be stuck in the long trade here. So it's much harder to take this than you think, especially if you try to get long. You get long here and you start taking it lower like this. I mean, from the lower end of this range, 06 down to 98, that's like an 8-point run down here. That's started getting pretty gnarly. So, but it was pretty brutal. This short squeeze. And they had this run that thing, and anybody has no relief. You can see there was no pullbacks, no nothing. They just kind of squeeze. And if you want to get on it, you have to buy the high, and hopefully you don't buy it right at the end of the run. So after the fact, it looks obvious. When you're looking at it developing, you have all these reasons why you don't want to step in front of it and take a short against this or buy the high because it's like there's nowhere to go. And when the range is like it is, you just need a little rotation down and get shaken out of that trade. So that is this Nasdaq for you. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now, guys. So I'll see you back in the morning, bright and early. It's going to be a couple of interesting days, Wednesday and video earnings in the after the close, and of course this Iranian situation. Let's see what happens with that. Alrighty, guys, we'll wrap it there. Have a good evening. I'll see you back in the morning. Later.